Hey everyone, going to be doing something a little different for this particular video. In this video, I'm going to be referencing no articles, but a letter written to me by Mr. Gato Villano. And thanks a lot for your contribution all the time. He's a regular contributor and a regular follower to my social media pages, whether I'm on Minds, Facebook, or even my YouTube channel. This gentleman is another well-versed individual that has the capacity and the ability to articulate his thoughts in a proper and logical manner, and he's willing to do so on a continuing and ongoing basis. And I'm very much appreciative of the fact that he is. Now, this particular letter he wrote to me is in correlation to his capacity and his willingness to try to offer his own opinions and potential solutions to the problems, to the issues that affect us all. So once again, thanks a lot, Gato, for your offer, for your contribution. And I'm going to try to do it a great service. Hi, Canadian Libertarian. I wrote this letter to offer a discussion about the fall of the West we are witnessing and to offer solutions to the current situation. I hope you find these ideas stimulating and that this discussion might open a path for the libertarian community to find creative solutions to this issue. We live in a period of history where we are stuck in a series of cycles we need to escape. The parents of the boomers dealt with a world of conflict, were drafted out to war. A world where the end of the Western way of life was under serious threat. The boomers lived in a false illusion of wealth where they kicked the can down the road to future generations. They were pampered by the government. They, the most privileged generation in history. They focused on experiences, sex, drugs, and they refused to take any responsibility for their actions. Generation X is the forgotten generation. They grew up with the Cold War, the discovery of AIDS, massive divorces, a complete explosion of the nuclear family, national debt, the loss of economic opportunities, bad government schools, and hoaxes created to control the public. Climate change, overpopulation, mass starvation. Gen X rebelled against authority. They had pride in their history. They valued free speech and freedom. The millennials grew up in single-parent families. They have no influences from their fathers. They have no backbone. They are basement-dwelling communists. They are looking for a father figure in the government. They swallowed the government media, government school narrative whole. They hate themselves and everyone else. They are nihilists. They are suicidal. They want the West to die. They want whites to be extinct. They are the most brainwashed generation in history. Now, I just, he's making some very important points here. And as a general statement, very accurate, or at least fairly accurate. Although I would offer in these situations, what I would offer, and just my opinion here, is you got to put out those caveats, right? Those disclaimers, because you can't use that broad brush. There are definitely a segment of that society or of that population, of that demographic, the millennials, that are conducive or in line with what Gato was suggesting here in this letter. But let's not forget, let's not be collectivists here. So there are exceptions to the rule. So there are millennials out there that are fighting for individual liberty, just like you or I. So let's at least offer that little bit of caveat so as not to destroy or collectivize or to destroy the incentives or to collectivize every individual that's in a particular age demographic or group. What is happening is that the millennials are becoming the next boomer generation. The government wants to use them. The government wants millennials to be as dependent on the government as the boomers were. I mean, that is no doubt a propagation, but once again, I'm just going to offer my own personal experience and my own personal opinion here. But mostly, and I've said this in past videos, mostly the boomers that you would be referencing in this particular letter would be those who, once again, are those in academia, the supposed experts or professionals, the ones that, put off or prolonged having their children far off into the later stages of their productive years, right? So, maybe in their 30s or 40s, because, us Gen Xers, as you probably realize, we have boomer parents as well. My parents are from the boomer generation because my parents didn't go into those professional fields. So they had their children on that normal average timeline that has, absolute historical precedent, in your teens and your 20s. So once again, we got to point out that discrepancy, that glaring divide, because that is a very real and observable thing out there when you're talking about demographics or age demographics and groups. Gen X will have to save the West like the pre-boomers did. So, the greatest generation, they call them. I will provide a major black pill so that people understand the urgency to act, and then I will provide hope and a possible set of solutions. I'll call it a white pill because I would ROFL, roll on the floor laughing, if progressives start calling optimism and solutions as racist. To understand the present Canadian situation, we need to understand our history and what led to our current situation. Understand the tools used by the left to take over our society, and we need to observe other socialist and communist countries and compare our situation to them in order to predict the outcome of the path we are on. Canadian history, where we went wrong. To make a story short, Canadians were a Commonwealth colony, which is the result of the union of the French and British colonists. The economy was largely based on agriculture, fishing, and mining. Religion was the cultural center of the colony. At the end of World War II, there was a major focus on patriotism and religion in politics. Politicians like Mackenzie King and Duplessis pushed the pendulum completely to the right. Religion took a totalitarian role in the lives of Canadians. Religion controlled politics, education, medicine, and orphanages. There has been major mistreatment of children by the church. If you did not conform to the church, you might as well change your name and start your life over again on the other side of the country, because they could block you economically and socially. The pendulum went so far to the right that we had to expect it to swing to the extreme left. This was the beginning of socialism in Canada. Pierre Elliott Trudeau was the instigator of that movement. He proposed cultural relativism and moral relativism to the population. There is no right and wrong. We are all the same. Let's abandon tradition and make Canada modern and international. Let's open our borders. Fuck, take drugs, kill your babies. Marriage and raising kids is for losers. Be selfish. You are not even required to work. Take no responsibilities and blame the USA for everything. I simplified 40 years of history because we all know all of this, and I don't want it to be the center of the conversation. We have more important things to talk about. The most important things to understand are that Pierre Elliott Trudeau was a Marxist. Trudeau hated Western culture, and Trudeau began the demographic replacement of Canadians on a large scale. Often people give him a pass for this, pretending that maybe it was a social experiment gone wrong. But this is not the only time demographic replacement has been done on this scale and resulted in the destruction of the societies. Rome is a well-known example of this. Pierre Elliott Trudeau was a well-educated man. He must have known the consequences of his actions. Trudeau used the Canadian Army in an urban area to control his citizens. I believe that the FLQ and Trudeau were working together. Most of the FLQ became teachers, politicians, or journalists. The worst members of the FLQ were sent to Cuba, where they were probably treated as communist heroes. I believe that this was staged out as a social experience to find out if a socialist government could make a military coup on a Western population and control them through military coercion. To support this hypothesis, I would point out that this is exactly what happened in Venezuela a few months ago, and prior to Trump's election, the Obama's administration was exploring a similar scenario. The tools used by the left. The Marxists use the same methods to take power over and over again. It is odd that most people haven't learned their bag of tricks yet. Once in a while, one of these dictators come up with a new trick, and he is quickly imitated by others. Sophistry. Everyone is well acquainted with the left's tendency to attach a tag to someone. Usually it is a slur like racist, homophobic, Islamophobic. This is your typical attack on a person's character. It is made to dismiss a person's argument completely without even addressing the argument itself. Basically, you are a bad person, therefore your argument is shit, is pretty much what they are trying to use against you. Sadly, this tactic works on idiots. So if you are talking to someone and you quote some historical figure and the person you are talking to interrupts you only to point out that the historical figure is a racist, then you are talking to an idiot and you are wasting precious minutes of your life you will never get back. Another sophistry tactic used by the left is to redefine terms. This seems harmless at first. We all know that words evolve over time, but when someone redefines racism in a way that a group can never be called racist, no matter how many hateful acts they commit, when they redefine violence to include words, when they redefine gender having nothing to do with sex, when they redefine rape to include things that are not even rape, even actions that are not even real crimes in order to jail undesired people, the sophistry becomes very dangerous. The destruction of culture. Marxists are well known to rewrite history to fit their narrative. Their versions of history can be a half-truths or a complete lies. This tactic is used to indoctrinate hatred of one's own culture at a very young age. Usually these lies are transmitted through public schools, media, art, movies, and groups such as feminism or BLM, Black Lives Matter. This is a very effective way to destroy a nation because the members of that nation will willingly destroy their own nation and cheer at the loss of their freedoms and sometimes the end of their bloodlines. Social unrest. By rioting, by threatening the population, by setting off bombs or other acts of terrorism, by instilling fear in the population about false environmental threats, by instilling fear about foreign threats, by using all these mechanisms of fear, the left creates a feeling of insecurity in the population. People fear for their safety, and like good little puppets, they run to the government for protection. The government is then more than happy to strip away the people's freedoms under the false pretense that is to keep them safe. Who else would make the trains run on time? This is a tactic that has been used by every government in history. The false belief that if the big daddy government wasn't there, society would fall apart and we would be left with chaos, death, cannibalism, you name it. When a government has been in charge of an institution for long enough, although the government fails monumentally at running this institution properly, people will believe that without the government, this institution would not exist at all. People who hold that belief are lemmings. You will often hear phrases like, who will take care of the poor? We cannot have a society without law and order. We need the police. Don't you want children to get an education? Yeah, the government is bad, but it is better than the alternative. So true, and some very excellent points being pointed out by Mr. Gato Villano in this particular letter. Good for you for doing so, sir. What people forget is that we had all these institutions prior to the government seizing control of them, and they all worked better in the private sector. At least when you're dealing with companies, you can vote with your dollar and obtain a better quality of service. Yeah, unlike government, a monopolized industry that is built and based upon force, right? Yeah, that doesn't work out properly for everybody. It might for those who get to control and maintain that force or that threat of violence, which is what government represents. Yeah, that's not the way to run society, and it's definitely not a way to run a family. No matter which scenario you try to play that out, it's not going to be beneficial for everyone involved. Maybe for the one that's the dictator, the authority, but everyone else becomes subject, serfs, and slaves to a particular ruler or authority. The destruction of the nuclear family. The Marxists have pushed for sexual freedom since its very beginning as a selling point of their ideology. They push the narrative that you don't have to take responsibility. The state will take care of the orphans. Just dump your mistakes on the state. Cultural Marxism in the form of feminism has pushed the narrative that a housewife is a slave to her husband, that raising children is sucking the life out of you, that you should take drugs, sleep with strangers, take in miles upon miles of cock. It doesn't matter. You can have it all. You have children when you are old, and the state will raise them for you. The cultural Marxists even convinced Reagan to pass a bill of no-fault divorce, something Reagan regretted the rest of his life. Now women have nothing to lose. They can marry a man, baby jail him, divorce his ass, and turn him into a wage slave for 18 to 20 years, minimally. We all remember the Cultural Revolution of Mao. Certain topics or narratives would be prohibited. There would be witch hunts of people committing the crime of wrongthink. The accused needed to beg and confess in public. They would be shamed and lynched. This was done under the pretense of political correctness. Mao was actually the guy who came up with that term. This is a tactic the left uses around the world. Wealth redistribution. The left believes that we are all equal in every aspect, so if there is any differences or outcomes amongst the population, it can only be the result of an injustice. This allows the government to take away people's property rights and to seize their resources, modify their salaries, taking away meritocracy, and to redistribute it to a population that hasn't earned these things, while the government keeps a nice administrative fee for themselves. These wealth redistributions allow the government to buy votes in many instances. Regulations and bad economical policies. A government is nothing more than a cancerous tumor. As such, the purpose of a government is not to be useful or functional. Its only purpose is to accumulate resources. This would have been used productively, and to use it to grow bigger and bigger until it kills the organism. Sometimes these resources can be monetary, but the most important resources government have ever exploited were human beings, as demonstrated in the book The Story of Your Enslavement by Stefan Molyneux. Yeah, I'll post a link to that actual video by Stefan Molyneux. He's got it in video form, The Story of Your Enslavement. And if you watch that, yeah, that's definitely one of those eye-opening, those red pill moments. Through regulations, a government can micromanage every aspect of an individual's professional and personal life. These regulations increase cost of production and add layers upon layers of red tape that kills the economy. Once the government takes over the market, the people's purchasing power no longer dictates production and prices. It is the government that regulates the production and prices. You have lost all freedoms as a consumer. Keynesian economy is often used by the left. Milton Friedman explained brilliantly every flaw of that system. The Keynesian model involves the creation of debt and the investment of resources into failing companies during a recession, and to pay back your debt once the economy recovers. The first thing that is wrong with this theory is that when you steal money from citizens and you just give it to companies, you haven't created any goods or services. You have only created debt and the devaluation of your currency. The second problem is that government never pay back their debt. If the economy recovers, they only buy more votes. The third problem is if those companies were failing, it means that what they were producing was not desired by the consumers. You have only kept a failing company alive artificially, and this company is now free from the market's pressures. Demonizing a group. Throughout the 1800s to this day, the Marxists have created many false threats in order to control the population. Usually this takes the form of an identifiable group of people within a population, usually the most productive and thereby the wealthiest group, and to use them as a scapegoat. You can blame every problem in history on that group. You can dehumanize that group. You can blame the economy, war, slavery, theft, you name it on that group. You can take away every rights of that group, dispose of them, and seize all of their resources. All collectivist type states have done exactly and precisely that. Many groups have become scapegoats throughout history. The bourgeoisie, the Jews, the American, the Falun Gong, the Christians, men, and now white men. I will quote the words of Greg Pierman. We have the tremendous capacity to turn people into less than us. And once you do that, you can justify a hell of a lot of awfulness. Purges. Once the Marxists take over power, they dispose of any dissident voices. They can take the form of soldiers knocking on your door at night, arresting you, and you will never be seen again. It can take the force of death camps. It can take the form of planned mass starvations. It can take the form of death marches. One thing is certain in the way they operate. The Marxists will identify the people that are most assertive, the people that stand out, the people who are moral and righteous, the people who are brave. They will start by disposing of those people. Then they are left with the women, the kids, the elderly, and the cowards. At this point, the decimation of a population happens very quickly. They can make a false promise. We are relocating you, so get on that train, or we will walk to this destination where we will have tents, foods, water, and medical care. We all know that there is no destination. There will be no food and water. Once people realize that they are too exhausted to fight back, they will walk until they die. The corpses will be disposed of as if it was nothing more than garbage. They will rewrite history. You will have never existed. Understanding our parents' situation. To understand where we are going, we need to take a look at Sweden and Venezuela. Last summer, the rebel media presented documents that showed that taxpayers in Canada paid on average 53% taxes. Just to point out, the founding fathers of America believed that people would go mad if they would ever have to pay 20% taxes. Our incompetent in chief is creating more and more taxes under the pretense that it is meant to save the environment, while at the same time spending billions on funding programs in other countries and funding the UN. While our government is spending money like a kid who received his first credit card, he is also importing massive amounts of economic migrants. These migrants, for the most part, have no marketable skills and they are not required to work. They are only required to vote Liberal. They are allowed to sit on their asses, collect welfare checks, and advocate for redistribution and the dismantling of the West. The Liberal government is also funding and imposing the institutionalization of the destruction of manhood in schools, medias, and the workplace. This will recreate the Sweden model. Spineless men, demonized by women and migrants, who work to support an authoritarian government that is actively replacing them demographically. They will pay 65+% in taxes. They will be thrown in jail for even looking or talking back to a woman. They will lose their livelihood if they ever dare to say they would like to preserve their way of life. Men and women will avoid each other. They will become lonely and miserable, and the birth rate will come crashing down. In the end, the educated masses will have had enough and they will migrate to another country to make a life for themselves. Last year, I have noticed a massive influx of Swedish migrants in my city. This will lead to a mass exodus of the population that have the ability to create capital and lead to the Venezuelan scenario. In Venezuela, the socialist government has heavily taxed the middle classes in order to redistribute the wealth and to fund government programs that were meant to buy votes. At the same time, the government has regulated profitable companies like the oil industries to a point where they were unable to produce a profit. This led to the exodus of the middle class to countries like the USA and Canada, where these people had economic opportunities. Every time a citizen left, the tax burden to the rest of the population increased. Close to 2 million people left Venezuela before the economy crashed. The government then used the police and the army to subdue the population. The socialist government made a coup by rigging the election and then removing the democratic process. The government is currently taking all the people's property by force and forcing people to work for free at the threat of a gun, slavery. The undesired population and those who are not needed are starved to death. Every riot or attempt to expose the coercion of the government is met with deadly force. This is very important to understand because this was probably the aim of Pierre Elliott Trudeau when he made his social experiment, using the army to control Canadian citizens. At the moment, the Canadian Army is underfunded. The salaries of the soldiers are reduced drastically, and our soldiers are sent to fight useless wars, such as the Mali Islamic Revolution. This is a tactic that was used by Obama, which is copied by Trudeau. If you want to control a country by force, you must get rid of any military force that is patriotic. For that, you must demoralize them by having them fight endless useless wars. You need to abandon them in poverty and misery after their military service. And if they die in combat, well, that's one less patriot to worry about. Trudeau probably understood that Canadian soldiers would never accept to oppress the population. That is why Justin Trudeau wants to get rid of them. Once the Canadian Army is no longer in the way, he can just crash the economy and use the UN forces to control us. Canadians have lived in peace for over 150 years in their homeland. Canada has not dealt with any significant domestic threats. The RK epigenetic selection type is swirling heavily to the R. Because of all those reasons, Canadians are, for the most part, unable to identify any threats and will dismiss any warnings as pure bullshit. Protesting and rioting on the streets for changes will only work against us. First of all, protesting is basically us asking the government to protect us against the government. Second, the way these protests will be shown on TV will portray freedom lovers as dangerous individuals who are fanatic. This will lead to people asking for the government for more protection. Thus, the government will grow even more. The white pill. There are some effective ways to turn things around. Philosophy can not only be focused on identifying and analyzing problems. An analogy of this would be a doctor that only offers diagnostics and no treatments. We need to propose and have discussions on possible solutions to our problems. This will enable us to find a cure. I will offer a possible way to solve the problem with the following steps. This is by no means the only way to solve the problem. Every aspect can be improved upon and new ideas can be added to it. Here are 4 steps to survive the fall of the West. Improve your way of life and get involved in the lives of your children. Make preparations for a possible collapse of the Western world. Survive the collapse. Attack the Marxists where it hurts. Improve your way of life and get involved in the lives of your children. One of the most important things to do at this moment is to get back in shape. Have better eating habits. Exercise and learn martial arts. By improving your physical shape, you are increasing the amount of testosterone in your metabolism. This will push you to obtain more status, earn more, increase your sexual market value, and it will improve the way you deal with threats. Testosterone increases your muscular mass. It makes you more stoic in stressful situations, which helps you stay calm and have more situational awareness, and it helps you identify threats. We need to restore manlyhood. So many young men have never had any male role models. Strong, independent, lead by example, live, let live, libertarian type leaders or role models. This is a path that leads to criminality, poverty, and to create more single-parent families. We need to learn from the Greeks. In ancient Greek society, the boys would learn how to become a man from other males in their community. This is a form of patronage. I believe we can achieve the same in modern society without any of those ancient Greek sodomy practices. What I am proposing is to create male clubs that goes out jogging, exercise, go through obstacle courses, and wrestle in a very manly fashion. Clubs that would celebrate manlyhood and promote dominant and competitive behaviors. Such clubs would trigger the feminists so badly their heads might explode. Of course, if you want to have a positive influence in the world, you must first work on yourself. This means to improve your self-knowledge, improve your way of life, and improve your abilities. I'm sorry to say this, but if you don't work on yourself and that your life is a mess, you will become more of a burden than a productive member. Take your kids in the outdoors. Show them how to make campfires, go fishing and hunting. Show them how to survive in the woods, how to find your way, what plants are edible. We need to learn from the example of Poland. Poland lived under Marxism, and this led to it having an immune system against all this bullshit. This is a lesson you must apply to your children. You must engage them. Ask them about what they learned in school. Push them to reason through all the Marxist bullshit that was taught to them in public school. Teach them the true history of Canada. This will act like a vaccine. Your children will grow up inoculated against the Marxist virus. I know that everyone is busy. Time is a finite resource. After a long day's work, you are tired. But think about it. If you don't act now, if you ignore the indoctrination of your children, you will pay a greater price in the long run. This might even lead to the end of your bloodline. Once again, excellent points, Gato. Really liking this letter so far. If you listen to TED Talks these days, you get the dumbest morons who don't know what they're talking about. They play around with buzzwords and repeat talking points spewed out by the globalists. I am pointing this out because if you type on YouTube education, imagination, you will find 20 different TED Talks about imagination being the resource of the future and education should be built around it. I have to disagree with that, not only because daydreaming will not pay the bills, but also because they are completely wrong about the future. If the collapse is inevitable, imagination is not the most marketable resource. Being able to rebuild everything we currently have is the most marketable skill. I am pointing this out to point out the importance of learning how to do plumbing, learn how to be an electrician, how to produce antibiotics, how to fix a car, how to build a roof, how to grow crops. When you can no longer depend on services, you need to become self-reliant. And the more we know, the less the Western civilization will be lost. Make preparations for a possible collapse of the Western world. We need to try to preserve the West, but we also need to prepare for the worst. The collapse of the Western economies is coming. We could change the path we are on tomorrow and prevent that end, but very few have the willingness to do so. We know that the Americans will fight. Cowboys do what cowboys do. The Second American Civil War is almost inevitable. Trump keeps fighting the deep state, and eventually he might get his JFK treatment. The Civil War will be bloody. The good guys will win. But it will take a decade, maybe 2, for them to win. And this is if World War III doesn't happen first. So what happens in Canada? Let me be blunt. Freedom lovers in Canada are too few. They are untrained and they have no chances of surviving any urban warfare. So the national solution is to survive the storm. Hiding inside cities is a bad idea. First of all, modern tools make it very easy to find hidden rooms inside houses. Also, the Jews already tried it during World War II. Very few Jews were successful with this tactic, and the Marxists are already expecting it. Secondly, everything that is said on the internet is there forever. So it is very easy to identify who opposed the Marxist ideology. And with the facial recognition tools we have today, libertarians won't last 5 minutes in an urban area. They will only pick you up and your family during the night and shoot all your bloodline in the back of the head. Well, maybe as some general statement, that might be accurate for certain people, but once again, don't collectivize everyone, because there are some libertarians that, they're not going to go off easily into the night by their captors or their oppressors. No, don't believe that for a minute, Gato. There are some Canadians that got a lot of fight still left in them yet, and they're very competent. In order to survive, it is important to understand the environment you live in and to take advantage of it. Canada is huge. Most of it is basically unexplored wildlands. If you buy a piece of land up north outside of the beaten path, you can create a cabin with all the resources you need for you and your community to survive. The rough terrain makes vehicles ineffective. The sheer size of the wild lands makes the cost-benefit ratio of finding people in the woods not worth the effort for the government. The most effective way to find people in the woods would be to use planes with thermal cameras. Thermal cameras are easy to trick. The UN uses .223 ammo. This ammo is designed for urban warfare. They are in a disadvantage in the wilds. Yeah. Oh, don't worry. That's another thing. In Canada, there's quite a few weapons, especially if you, as Gato was suggesting, you get into the rural parts of Canada. Now the police or the military aren't at such an advantage that you would suspect. Matter of fact, they're at a great disadvantage, because while some of them, have some actual real-world training, almost all rural-type people's hunting and fishing types, those staunchly independent rural types, they're very proficient with their weapons. They started out learning how to use a gun, at very early ages. I won't point out any particular age groups or when they started, but very young. Some of them haven't even reached their double-digit ages, and they've already learned how to shoot weapons. Okay, and that's normal. That's as normal as breathing in certain parts of this country. So the first step to surviving the fall of the West is to buy a piece of land up north and build a cabin. You can even have many families contributing for the cost. The second thing you need to do is store books in that cabin. Tons and tons of books, stories, histories, technical books. The Marxists always burn books. If you want to preserve the West, you need to preserve this knowledge for future generations. Thirdly, you need to store tools, food, and ammo. You need to store seeds. Computers you no longer use can be useful. So instead of recycling it, send it into your cabin. You can create a lead battery. There are many ways to be creative here. It is a good idea to create a hidden room in the basement so that vandals don't steal all this stuff. I would suggest purchasing a 30-30 or a 45-70 rifle. This will allow you to hunt for food, and can allow you to protect your family. Attack the Marxists where it hurts. Now that you have survived the fall of the West, you can now work on rebuilding the West. The first step would be to get rid of the Marxists. To do so, you need to attack them where it hurts. For that, you need to understand your enemy. The Marxists are good at two things. They are good at infiltrating every group and organize. They are good at purging each other's. When Marxists have no one left to attack, they start attacking themselves. There is nothing a communist fears more than being purged by other communists, and for that they are always looking for allies. One thing Marxists are good at is to identify people who are infiltrating their ranks. This is something you can start doing right now. If you don't make any waves in academia and that you jump through the hoops, you can climb the ladder. If enough non-leftists are at the top, you can influence who is climbing the ladder. You can attend feminist events. You can pretend that you are very interested in what they have to say. You can fuck dozens of blue-haired girls. Everything you need to do to gain their confidence. If you survive the fall of the West, you can then reintegrate society. You can pretend you fled because you were afraid and now you are back. You use your contacts to get back into influential circles. Then you climb to the top of the Marxist pyramid. And once you're at the top, you start purging all the communists below you. And the funny thing is, if you purge no one, they will suspect you are not one of them. Once the cowboys win the war, you help the transition to a free society. The West is saved. And that's the end of the letter. And like I say, Gato has done a great job here. You know, this is a very well thought out and articulated letter. And I very much appreciate you sending this to me. And I hope I've done it justice in this video and reading it. And, you know, hopefully we get a chance to have an actual conversation so we can actually bounce back some of these ideas and these concepts and some of the other alternative options that might be out there that I've thought of. I've got other options that I could present as well. But yeah, great job on this letter, Gato. We definitely need more and more people like you out there that aren't just bitching and complaining and whining about the fact that there's a lot of bad things that are happening out there and among us and in the Western world, but actually offering genuine solutions. This is the stuff that needs to be discussed and needs to be pointed out and needs to be hammered out. These are the kinds of topics that conversations need to be taking place. Thank you for stepping up to the plate and offering such a well thought out and articulated letter to the Canadian people or anyone else in Western societies so that we can once again try to do our best to bring about genuine freedom and liberty to each and every one of us, or at least to those of us who are deemed worthy of those freedoms. You know, those who actually want to use the power of the state against you, these aren't the people I'm concerned about. These are people that actually, and they're always going to exist, but these are people that need to feel that threat. They need to feel the retaliatory effect from those of us that normally have that live, let live mentality. But like Gato is pointing out here, and like I've said many times in past videos, we've got to flex our muscles, folks, right? Yeah, no preemptive force, right? Well, unless you see someone coming at you, then yeah, you best strike first. You don't wait. When you see an imminent threat, don't wait until you're hit first, right? Make sure you're proactive. That's how you'll survive in that situation. But once again, absent of a direct threat, we have to show each other or other people how to be leaders and how to be independent, moral, upstanding human beings that walk softly but carry a big stick and are more than willing. That's like Jordan Peterson himself has said in many other of his lectures and in his videos is, yeah, you got to be dangerous, right? Coming across as just purely benevolent or sheepish or conformist, you're not a threat to any of these oppressors or these tyrants or these control freaks or these authoritarian types. No, you got to be a good, decent, moral, upstanding citizen, but you also got to be a direct representation and a direct threat to those who want to oppress or impose their will, their mandates, or their edicts on you. Gato gets it. I get it. Lots of other people that watch my videos get it. And I'm hoping that more and more Canadians will start to get it. Great job, Gato. Hopefully we'll have a great conversation regarding not just this topic, but anything else that we can conjure up and converse about in the future. It's Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.